Hello and welcome to this hangout. John Anile is probably going to be joining, and Ronnie S. But they'll have to get the link. They have the link probably by now. Here's some Ice House beer. 5.5% alcohol. This lady walking down the street, she's about 81 years old. Earlier, I said, I have some beer. Ooh. No, she saw my t-shirt, Pabst Blue Ribbon. And she says, oh, that makes me want to have a Pabst Blue Ribbon right now. I said, well, I don't have any Pabst Blue Ribbon in my fridge, but I have some other beer. Oh, what do you have? And I told her. Ooh, she said, I like light beer. I said, well, I don't have any light beer. I said, but you could try, some of the other stuff I have. But she said it didn't sound good to her. I said, okay. So you're welcome to have some of it. I like to get people to try new things, but, of course they won't usually. So yesterday I went to, I'll try to provide the link on Facebook also. Yesterday I went to Port Hudson, Louisiana. So that at night I can see the lights on US Highway 61 right here. Sometimes you could hear the cars. All right. And so if you just stay on that highway right there and you go 75 miles, you'll get to Port Hudson, which is just north of East Baton Rouge Parish, like not even a mile north. Port Hudson State Battlefield Park. It's huge. I went on some of the trails, but seem like you could never go on all the trails. Let me give them my link. Link to the war discussion video hangout, whatever you call that. Live hangout. It's video, audio, video.
Hey, Ron.
I asked somebody to add you to Beer Talk 2020 on Google Hangouts. I always try to add you, but I can't get your name.
I am on that.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I'm part of it.
I didn't see your name on it. I guess I overlooked it. I don't know. I was trying to rush.
John Anile said he might join in a little bit.
Okay. Hey, Craig. Good afternoon. Now, so anyway, I went up the road 75 miles, and I'm going to do screen share for a moment, okay?
Yeah.
Not for long. I'll show you what I was doing. So here's Wikipedia. Siege of Port Hudson, Louisiana, May 22nd to July 9th, 1863 was the final engagement in the Union campaign to capture the Mississippi River. Now, Vicksburg is known as the last place to surrender on the river, but it was actually Port Hudson, Louisiana, which was 5 days later. I mean, Vicksburg, Mississippi, yeah, that's the big key. But Port Hudson was also there along the river, and it had to be captured for the U.S. to completely, to invade and take over the South. It says here the U.S. lost about 5,000 killed, Confederates about 750 killed and wounded, and 250 died of disease, so about 1,000. But here's a map we'll show you. Now let me do it like this. If you go to Port Hudson, there's not much of a very rural area, relatively rural area. There wasn't much there then. It's high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, so didn't work out. And it's through there. It's deep ravines. I mean, it's huge. So I trail. I couldn't believe it. It was really incredible. It's deep, but I'll try to do this. It'll be better. Can you see it?
Yeah. With the Wikipedia article.
So, yeah. So here's the map. All right. So here's New Orleans, which was captured in 1862. U.S. came up the river here, got past the two forts down here. I've been to one of the forts. Went up the river, captured the city of New Orleans. So then they were coming down from Kentucky, captured Memphis. Then Vicksburg was the big fortress. And they came up the river, captured Baton Rouge here, and then to Port Hudson, which is in a
Did
big
they come
bend
from the north, or did they come through the Gulf originally?
from the Gulf.
Oh, okay.
From the Gulf.
Where'd they leave from to get there?
Oh, Tampa, Florida, and
Okay.
Washington, D.C., and all that.
So they captured Florida first, I guess.
They had captured some areas of Florida early on. Key West, they never lost. They had that the whole time, and they captured Tampa, St. Petersburg area. Some parts of Florida they never could capture.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
You see this area here? This is a channel that you can go from the Gulf into Lake Pontchartrain and go through New Orleans from the back. But there's two forts there. Well, actually, those forts were built during the Spanish-American War, but they were forts back then. They didn't want to go through there, so they figured they'd go up the river here, the long way. And they did capture New Orleans. They did capture New Orleans. Then they just kept capturing places along the river. So they're coming from the south and then up from the north. So you had a gap between Port Hudson and Vicksburg where the river was still open.
Mm-hmm.
So the Confederates knew they were going to try to capture Port Hudson, so they built up huge fort, like a fortress. Not a fort, actually, but fortresses, breastworks. So here's a photo of what some of it looked like. And when you're going on those trails, you can't even see the river. The trees are so thick, you can't really see the river. It's too concealed. But there's one of those big cannons, and there's a trench they built. They just slowly got towards the Confederate defensive areas. And
so is it mainly like a Civil War trail, or they have all that stuff, or more so than a nature trail?
Well, today it's mostly nature trails because here's a map. Let me show you these guys real fast. Just real quick. Frank Gardner, Confederate commander, General Gardner, and then Nathaniel Banks, U.S. commander.
The Union side?
United States Army. Yeah.
Got a nice sword
Banks.
there.
Okay. Nice, fancy, valuable sword.
Yeah.
Fancy uniform. That's a dress uniform. Obviously, he wasn't at the battlefield dressed like that.
Yeah.
So there's that big bend in the river. There's the boats. Farragut, Admiral Farragut coming up from New Orleans. There's Port Hudson, the little town, which if you go there now, there's nothing left. I mean, right next to the river, I think it's all woods today.
Okay.
And then this is a map of the battle, and then this showing the siege. In the woods, the trails take you to these. Really, it's just like these hills you see. They're like mounds, but they're left over, and they tell you don't go walking on the mounds. I guess they don't want them to be damaged.
Oh, okay.
And
People do it anyway?
I'm sure they do. Children. There's a big cannon the Confederates had. to shoot down on the invaders. They call it the demoralizer.
Really?
Yeah. And then they showed how they had dug these holes in the ground, and they took these hollow cannonballs and put a long string attachment. And when the U.S. troops charged towards the fortifications, they pulled the string and it would blow up, kind of like a landmine. So, but what happened was they eventually kept getting closer and closer to their defensive areas, and they surrounded. And then anyway, once Vicksburg surrendered on July 4th, they were going to be surrounded from the north and the south in food anyway. So it wasn't any point to keep fighting. So they just gave us the longest siege in American soil. So let's see if this comes up. Makes everything goes. No. All right. So let's see here real fast. So there's the river. There's Port Hudson, the few streets and the buildings, which, like I say, if you go down now, you probably see no streets and no buildings, but a lot of trees. Right. And there's the railroad bridge. I don't think that railroad's there anymore. But like, so here, like where I'm showing you with this cursor, there's a highway that runs up here, US Highway 61, 4-lane highway. You can go fast. I actually missed it, and I had to make a U-turn and come back because I missed the entrance. But you like drive up here, and there's an entrance, and then it goes to a parking area, and then there's about 10 trails going all through these ravines and woods, very thick woods, and they'll take you after about 1.5 miles or 2 miles to these battlement areas here. And that's where I saw a husband, a wife, and 2 kids picnicking. Saw a huge amount of people hiking and walking. You know, relatively large amount of people. So that was how they were doing their quarantine, by going to this park. And they were supposed to charge. They were supposed to charge $4, but there was nobody at the window taking the money. So I guess they said, don't go to work. Just let them come to the park. You know.
Hey man, I think some states are closing parks, so at least they didn't do that.
Right. Some states are coming really socialist, you know, and screaming at people in the park. I mean, if you're in the park and you're hundreds of yards away from each other, how are you going to get the virus? And then somebody said something very stupid to me yesterday. Well, it's in the air. It's in the air. I said, well, then how the hell would social distancing matter? You know, if it's in the air, then we need to immediately stop all the restrictions and let everybody go back to work, and whoever dies, dies, and whoever doesn't die, right?
Yeah.
And that's the dumbest thing in the world to say. And if it's true, what are we doing around here, you know?
I know. It's just very frustrating.
So, but yeah, so the war, I've made videos about the war before, and then this morning I told people I went to Port Hudson, and some people started getting set off and talking about it, you know, and I was saying, well, I might make another video. I mean, I don't know what else there is to be said about it.
So why did you say this video would be controversial?
Oh, I got this Johnny Walker Blue Label. I'm going to put it back up. Well, because, you know, you're only really allowed to say certain establishment things about that war. That's like World War II. They're like sacred wars, you know, like a holy doctrine. So with like World War II, there's an establishment history, and you can only agree with that.
Yeah, you can only go by those talking points that you learned in like 10th grade or whatever. So
if you get and you bring up any alternative thinking, then people start throwing names at you, and
I would say more so World War II though. That's the top one.
Yeah, no joke.
Yeah, and that's true. And then they look at you weird because you're not wearing a mask. At one point, they're gonna get violent and, you know, say if you're not wearing a mask, you can't even go shopping.
That's why I use the term National Socialism. It's very interesting to watch how they slowly instituted this. They probably knew all along that they were going to make it to where you were under house arrest and couldn't even leave your house.
Yeah.
But they wanted to slowly institute it since March.
It's been kind of like, I wouldn't say slow. I mean, it was very quick.
Right, but you know what I'm saying? Like, but they couldn't do it too fast. People would get scared, so they want to slowly create the fear. First, you create the fear, and then you can institute the totalitarian measures. You see, so
Yeah, like I think you said, fear sells. It makes a lot of sense.
right, I said that on Facebook. Fear sells, but I'm not buying. No, I said fear sells, and you're buying. I was pointing at my Facebook friends. Fear sells, and you're buying.
I had somebody tell me a government that doesn't have the power to quarantine isn't a government. I mean, that's just what would you really even say to that?
I would say, I guess it's the same as if they don't have the power to drop an atom bomb on civilians, and they don't have the power to be a government. I don't know. I mean, how do you can't? So yeah, it's going to get much more restrictive, probably, of the non-supervision. You know, go into the park. Walking is not going to make anybody catch the virus. I drove to Mississippi.
Vitamin D is supposed to be a good immunity against it, and if you're forced to stay inside,
going out in the sun and getting fresh air, like I've been doing, to have all the windows open, that's a smart thing to do. Being cooped up with air conditioner running and just sitting in the dark crying because you think you're going to die.
Yeah.
Hey,
that can't be too healthy.
You're probably going to be more people dying of anxiety and stress than the virus. And look, what I wanted to say, and I'm going to put this, I think, tomorrow on Facebook. I didn't want to do it on Palm Sunday. There's more. I wanted to say this. Most people are dying with, not from. People are using the wrong preposition. Not with. They're dying with it, not from it. And I know people, 9,000 people die.
Yeah, so it makes other conditions you have worse, I guess.
Right. 24,000 people died from the flu this year.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably mostly died with the flu, or the flu made what they had worse.
Right.
Okay. But the strange thing to me is you got people with highly questionable immune systems all the time, and they don't seem too worried about it. They shopping here, shopping there, touching everything. There's the flu. They catch it, they die, and no one makes a big issue out of it. People say, well, they had the flu. The man was 93 years old. What do you expect? But if it's the corona, the corovis, I call it corovis. Oh no, I'm gonna die. And
yeah, on the news,
my freedom. I'm trading my freedom for safety. I'm going to trade my freedom for safety. Well, you're going to probably end up with no freedom and no safety. What now?
On those charts they have on the news where it's number of people contacted and the number of people who died, they should have right next to that the flu, number of people who have the flu, number of people who have died from the flu, and you'd see a huge difference. That the flu is so much more.
So far, now people say, well, how do you know corona isn't going to pass it? Well, I don't know. Maybe it will.
Isn't going to what?
Pass it up. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I'm not panicking. I'm not walking around scared. I mean, I've realized, I thought to have communism, we would need the vanguard of the revolution. We would have to have a vanguard of the revolution to bring communism to America. But we don't. We just need the fear of a virus. And now we have communism.
You know what, Ron? The coronavirus, I say it's the new Osama bin Laden.
Much more effective.
It's the new 9/11.
Yeah, hold on a second. I'll have to call him back. Well, people take it the wrong way. They say, you say it's not a threat. You think it's not dangerous. I never said that. I never.
The response to it is more dangerous than the threat itself.
I don't
the original thing.
Right. I never said it wasn't a threat, and I didn't say it wasn't dangerous. But I think people don't have an ability to look at things in perspective.
And say like 3 years from now, if there's like an Ebola breakout or that swine flu happens again, Why wouldn't they be able to just say at that point, well, okay, now we're going to put you under quarantine again? Because they have this precedent now that they can do this.
Yeah, just
So it's giving more and more powers to the state.
just
And
be
that's
a
what happened during 9/11.
yeah, be a rolling communist Cuba type situation, and people are very compliant, you know.
Very
And
compliant.
these people,
Scarily so.
right now, these people on Facebook, these old neoconservatives that I always tangle with, I'm America, man, America. I'm like, it's funny because now you're a weaselly, slinking coward, and all your bravado has gone flat.
Well, it's just been moved towards something else.
And they're all getting on there talking about, you know, stay home, man. You know, we're going to all keep safe, man. And they're all talking about masks and social distancing. I'm like, what happened to all the tough guy America stuff?
Oh, it's still there. It's just being diverted to this right now.
Like, diverted to compliance with
like if you don't comply with the masks or whatever, then you're going to be considered like unpatriotic or some shit like that.
All right. So we were talking about the war, and we were saying it's the same thing. It's the same type of idea. If you don't comply with this fear mongering, then you're unpatriotic.
Right.
You want people to die, obviously. You don't care about anybody. You know, same thing. Blah blah blah. If you don't go with, like you said, the talking points of World War II, you're a whatever.
A Nazi or something. Sympathizer.
That's a common thing that people will use to shut down the debate.
An anti-Semite.
Another
common one.
Common weapon, which some people are intimidated by. Right. It was definitely a globalism thing because we see all the usual suspects championing this, championing this. And when you see the usual suspects championing something, then you know what's up.
That's a good comment.
Oh, right. Like these guys that like to stunt on Facebook all the time. Come and take it. It's like, obviously they could, because you're so scared and scary. Nate makes good comments. And the war on the South, the so-called Civil War, which is an inaccurate term.
What would you call it accurately? The War of Northern Aggression? I've heard it called.
Well, it would be good. But okay, that's partisan. People say, that's partisan. Okay. Accurate, but partisan. All right. Well, how about calling it the war between the states? It was one group of states fighting another group of states. But probably the best term would be the war to prevent Southern independence, or the war of Southern secession. That would be the best term. It's not a civil war. What is a civil war? A civil war is when two people in the same country are fighting to overthrow or take control of the country. Well,
yeah, that's true.
Confederates weren't trying to take over the country. They just wanted to get out.
They were trying to, form their own country.
Or maybe a divorce war. It was like the American Revolution, dude.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I've heard it called the Second American Revolution.
But you're really not allowed to use those kind of terms and go there. You can't go there because then people will say, oh, you like slavery, you know, wow.
Yeah.
And I laugh that off with great contempt when people start that. I say, you really a tough guy. Now, here's a man that wants to get down to it. I say, well, since you want to get down to it, why don't you come on the hangout and state your piece? No, they won't do that. And they'll use common catchphrase. No, I never heard of camel.
I'm not either. No.
They'll say stuff like, I'm not going to dignify your opinions with an appearance. I'll say, no, that's not really it. You're watching, though. I'll say, but so are you even dignifying it with a viewership? With viewership. I said, no, that's not really it. It's not that you're not going to dignify my opinions with an appearance. It's that, you know, if you come on here, it's going to be such a disastrous defeat.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed nobody has tried at all.
You know, you don't want that on record is the real reason. Don't give me that. You know, It's time to man up instead of punking up. You know, punks jump up to get beat down, and I'm so sick of hearing this. You know,
Yeah, I see your point.
I mean, for real. People want to say this, they want to say that. Okay, good, great, that's great.
Yeah.
You got 30 minutes. You can talk about the Civil War, whatever you want to call it, for 30 minutes. I won't interrupt. Now I'll rebut. Who knows? Maybe I'll agree. Maybe you'll convert me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the point.
You could
Should
talk
be able to
about,
have an open discussion.
right. You could talk about the Great War. The I'm sorry. The what do they call it? The Good War. The Good War.
The Great War was the first one.
Yeah. You could talk about the Good War for 30 minutes. That is a great bargain. And you can do all your establishment talking points. I'm going to rip them
People
down.
do it in the comments, though. So I guess you can use that as interaction.
People like Nate of Missouri make comments that are respectable. And now here's an old accusation. It's a tired accusation. They'll tell me, or they'll say, you know, that guy, he deletes comments that disagree with him. But then it'll be comments like, hey, mother effer, why don't you kill yourself and die, B? It's like, that's not really...
That's not adding to the conversation too much.
Right. That, in their opinion, that was their expression of disagreement with the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
And then they can go back and say, I told you that guy deletes comments that he doesn't agree with. You know,
Right. Right.
Like William Kepler said this morning, that's an example of a lack of discernment, talking about a different topic. If you disagree with us about World War II, fine. State your case. If you got to come on and make pejorative comments, put downs, call people names, you need to get lost, like, you know, scram, beat it. Because you cannot support your position. And
I guess when somebody's been kind of, what you'd say, propagandized by these ideas their whole life, to no fault of their own, it just happens, and then they hear something else, they don't want to hear it at all. I guess it kind of triggers them to name call and whatnot. It's more of a psychology thing than anything else, I think.
Yeah.
I'm no psychologist, so I don't know much about it, but it sounds like
I'm not a psychologist.
A kind of thing like that. It's like you're telling them what they have known their whole life to be incorrect. So
I'm not familiar with that, but I think I've, in passing, heard it.
you're offering, what was it? Oh, Steven Crowder. I have heard of him. Yeah, I haven't really listened to it, but that does sound interesting.
Yeah. Now, talking about these wars, Port Hudson is a historical fact. Whether you agree with it or not, is irrelevant. It happened. Okay, like, it's a battlefield. You can go. Now they got the Confederate flag out there in front and the U.S. flag, because that's the two sides that were fighting. You know, it makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the United States battlefields, they took down the Confederate flag because some people were offended by that.
Yeah, that's a whole another thing.
Right. Well, that's who was in the battle. But they were saying it gives it a place of honor, which, of course, it's well known. I mean, people on the internet know it's a known fact that I have been known to make pro-Confederate comments. Okay, we know that. No surprise.
Okay.
You know, yeah, it's obvious. I have always been pro-Confederate when we talk about the war against the South. Mm-hmm. We know that. That's not a shock. My point is, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong. World War II. It's well known that I have an anti-war attitude.
Yeah, World War II. You basically just say you don't agree with the American involvement, but you're not taking Germany's side or anything like that.
No. In fact, I've been very critical of Germany, and then I've had the pro-German people come at me. You know, the pro-Hitler people. Oh, well, they had to attack Poland. I was like, what are you talking about? You know, and then I get into it with them and they say, well, you're controlled by the Jews. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting from both sides, you know?
There's comments that are just conversation stoppers because they're ludicrous like that. And you can't really go too far, you know, to entertain that type of thing.
German Union soldiers in Kansas.
That's
A
cool.
lot of the Union soldiers were immigrants.
Yeah, there was the riots in New York City because of all the Irish immigrants that were getting drafted into the Union Army. So they had draft riots. I know that.
Yeah, there were a lot of immigrant soldiers who were, kind of like mercenaries because they didn't care. They knew nothing about the history of the country. So they're like, hey, you want to make some easy money?
From what I heard, people would get to Ellis Island, get off the boat, and be given a uniform, a Union uniform. It happened to some people.
Sounds about right. I haven't heard that, but yeah. So Kansas City Southern Railroad right on time. I don't really know the schedule. So like the war against the South, the Good War, World War II, so-called. People can bring up any topic. Let's discuss it. Let's discuss it. People this morning were saying, let's discuss it. Okay. I mean, I've very clearly explained why the South was right in the first war. I have a book right here. I recommend everybody read it. This book was written 29 years ago. Everybody needs it, or published 29 years ago. Everybody needs to read this book.
I never heard of that. Who's that by?
James and Walter Kennedy. Great book. Great book. Everybody should.
I take it no relation to the famous Kennedys.
No, exactly. No. This is a fabulous book. It just is one of the best books I ever read. Okay.
Oh, let me jot that down. I've never heard of that one. Who was the author? James Kennedy?
James and Walter Kennedy. It's a well-known book. It's published in Louisiana. Surprise.
So my understanding of the war was that the South had a right to secede because that's actually part of the Constitution. And when they did secede, they were told that they couldn't. Is that what you'd say?
Certainly true. In fact, hold on, let's look at these. Yeah, no joke. Okay, when South Carolina joined the United States, see, a lot of states didn't want to join the Constitution. They already had a Constitution. The Articles of and after only
the
a few
Articles
years,
of Confederation, yeah. It lasted like what, 9 years?
Yeah, but after only 6 years, they were saying it's not working. It's not working.
You had the Whiskey Rebellion. That's what they say was the main catalyst.
Well, that happened after the Constitution. The new Constitution was adopted.
Was it after the Constitution?
Yeah.
Okay.
You might be thinking of Shays' rebellion, but there was some conflicts. There were some problems. Okay, but anyway, some people were saying, "Man, it's a big rush to get rid of the Constitution. We just got started." It'd be like
the Articles, you mean?
Which was the original Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. Well, it was a Constitution. It was how the United States is going to run. It was a framework. That's what a Constitution is.
So they were supposed to meet and discuss reforming the Articles, but then instead of doing that, they threw it out and made a whole Constitution. Yeah,
they said they were meeting to amend the Articles.
Right.
May not be true. They probably knew all along they were going to scrap it. But it doesn't matter because the state still had to approve it. So they said, well, we're going to make this whole new Constitution. And a
lot of the states weren't interested in it. I know New York was one of them because the Federalist Papers, which was written to try and persuade people to accept the Constitution, a lot of it was geared towards New Yorkers who didn't want the Constitution. That's what I heard.
There were a lot of people that didn't want it, and Rhode Island didn't want it. And they said, well, if 3/4 of the states agree, we'll adopt it. So then they had the big debate, and that's where they wrote the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, which was a series of newspaper articles.
Mm-hmm.
And those papers are great to read. I have the whole thing in a book. I'm not going to go.
I've read some. I mean, not the majority of it.
I read the whole thing, start to finish, and it's great because most Americans have never bothered reading it, you know. But it's great because it talks about, now the Federalists said the Anti-Federalists were the ones that wanted the Bill of Rights, but the Federalists, like
Alexander Hamilton,
said, you don't want a Bill of Rights. That's the most dangerous thing. He said, because what you're doing is you're implying that the U.S. government has powers which it was never delegated.
Yeah.
Like they're saying, Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of speech. What Alexander?
So you shouldn't have had to say that, because it was already implied that the government couldn't take that away from you.
No, it wasn't even implied. It wasn't delegated to the U.S. government. That's what Alexander Hamilton said. He said, there's nowhere in the Constitution we just wrote where it says the U.S. government can take away your freedom of speech.
Right.
You want us to make an amendment saying they can't take away. In other words, he's saying, you want us to make an amendment saying the government has no right to do what they have no right to do.
Right. So it's not really an amendment then.
It's like
you're not amending it.
It's like two negatives. What do two negatives do? They make a positive. He said it's a trick. It's a trick. The government shall not, the right to bear arms shall not be forbidden.
Abridged? Is it abridged?
Whatever it is. Hamilton said, but they don't have that right to do it anyway. So why are you making an amendment forbidding them from doing what they don't have a right to do? You're implying, like you said, that they have that right.
So that's the difference of positive and negative rights, right?
Right. And the Anti-Federalists were so scared of the U.S. government, they're saying, no, you're going to create an empire. You're going to create an empire. And so they adopted the Bill of Rights. And then there we go. That's what we got. So because now they'll say, well, the Second Amendment cannot be violated, except in these 250,000 different exceptions. So, do people in California know that Abe Lincoln was against Western U.S. expansion? I don't even know that. I know that he wanted to send all black people back to Africa.
Was Lincoln for that? I know some people were. I didn't hear Lincoln was. Yeah, the Kansas Missouri Compromise, was it called? Or Kansas.
Well, he's talking about the Civil War they had in Kansas in the 1850s.
Oh.
Right, and why was that? Because they were a bunch of humanitarians? No, because the Free Soilers, the white Northerners,
the Free Soil Party,
who moved out west, said, we don't want our great Western land to be Africanized.
Yeah, a lot of people who were for the sending African Americans back to Africa thing were just because they didn't want to be around black people.
Right. They were against slavery in a large sense because they were not wanting to have black people in their
And then there was actually a colony in Africa, right? Called, I think, Liberia.
Exactly.
It's still a nation state to this day.
Exactly.
That's a pretty interesting story. Right.
It's very interesting. And but it was a project that didn't really pan out.
It didn't pan out, but it's still a nation though, after all these years.
Still a nation state. A free country. It's the only country in Africa that was never a colony of a European country.
Was it a colony of the United States?
No.
Technically?
No. It was simply a project started by American activists, which you won't call activists. But it was not ever really technically, not really sponsored by the United States government. Although President Monroe, James Monroe, certainly strongly supported the idea of Liberia, and that's why the capital of Liberia is called Monrovia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because James Monroe was a slave owner like Thomas Jefferson, and they didn't like the idea of slavery, but they didn't like the idea of a mixed race, what we would call a multicultural country. So they said, well, it's terrible what they did bringing these poor black people from Africa. So the best thing to do is to ship them all back. on a voluntary basis, what the Liberia Project was. Not like Abraham Lincoln wanted to do forced deportation, but Monroe and others, North and South, were trying to do a fundraising thing where they would encourage Black people to move back to Africa. There weren't too many that took the offer.
Because I mean, they were used to living in America.
Right. A few
It
did.
was how many generations in the past that their, ancestors were brought from Africa. So
Right. So they
yeah.
came, wouldn't you like to live in Africa? And they were like, no,
No.
not really. But Lincoln was going to say, guess what? You're going back to Africa.
I didn't know that. I never heard that.
Oh, yeah. Well, the established media doesn't like to talk about those speeches. But anyway, yeah, you're right, because the Western states would have been totally inappropriate for slavery, would have never worked out there. And that's what Stephen Douglas said.
Mm-hmm.
They asked Stephen Douglas, what do you think about slavery out West? He said,
well, that's an easy question that he has here. It's because Americans were originally English. So
right, just like in Louisiana, and in the Southwest, all the cities are named after Spanish and French cities, and
right.
like in Florida, St. Augustine. But Stephen Douglas was smart, because he said, but he lost the election in 1860, which was a disaster because he could have probably kept the country united. He was not a firebrand or a troublemaker at all.
What political party was he did he belong to in that year?
Democrat. He was from Illinois. So Stephen Douglas was pro-Southern and pro-Northern. You know what I'm saying? He was like a great American, pro-American. And so, whereas Lincoln was like really pro-Northern, pro-capitalist.
Lincoln was a member of the Whig Party, which is, then he became a Republican, but the Whig Party a lot of the Whigs became Republicans.
Yeah, it really was the new Whig Party. Just the Whig Party reset, minus the South. But they asked Douglas. See, Douglas would just tell you stuff without thinking of the political repercussions. So they were having a debate, and they said, whereas Lincoln was a more calculating, like insidious politician who wanted to.
He was a politician. So.
Yeah, a really bad one. So, but very clever, very clever. So, but Lincoln says, well, what about slavery out West? And Stephen Douglas said, well, what difference does it make? I'm just paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact quote. How could I remember the exact quote? Uh-oh. Ronnie got knocked off. He's back.
No, I'm here.
Something happened. He got knocked off for a second. So Douglas said, well, what the hell difference is, basically, what difference does it make? He said, look, whether they pass laws restricting slavery in the West or they don't pass laws, it really doesn't matter, because slavery can't work out West.
Okay.
There's not the kind of farmland that would make it.
It's not like plantation country like the South.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't exist. So we're arguing about things that are irrelevant. It doesn't matter. There's not going to be slavery out West. Whether you have laws for it or have laws against it, it's not going to matter. It's a moot point. Well, the Southerners got mad at him and said, he doesn't support slavery. Missing the point, Then the Northerners don't like him. Oh, he's not trying to stop slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And he's thinking, y'all are really dumb, right? So he got no support. He lost all his Southern and Northern support in the 1860 election, which in a normal time period, he'd have easily beaten Lincoln, but he lost. And then, well, anyway, the Democratic Party got split. There was another Democrat running on the Southern ticket. It was a real fiasco. So then Lincoln, who was really disliked throughout the North, not just the South, like all the Democrats in the North couldn't stand the guy. And he was, the Democrats were the bigger party in the North, like today even. And then, of course, in the South, he was 100% hated pretty much. And so, but then the vote was so split that he won the Electoral College, and then he got elected, which was, as we know, a terrible result. Let's see.
Kind of similar to 1912 with Woodrow Wilson.
Okay, let's look at this comment. Oh yeah, Woodrow Wilson, right? Exactly. 1912.
Miscegenation.
Miscegenation, he means. Yeah, a legacy of slavery, perhaps. Yeah, a legacy of the culture, at least.
Well, okay. So the thing is, slavery was condoned by the state. So it's not. It wasn't a private enterprise thing. It was really just the state. It was legal to have slaves. There was the same thing in Jim Crow laws that it was legal to have segregated blacks here and whites here. So that's a problem with the state at the end of the day.
Okay, here's the chimera. Chimera is like a fake animal, and slavery is a fake argument. But people love to use it because it pulls at their heartstrings. You know, it's a humanitarian issue, right? So that's their secret weapon that they use all the time when they discuss the war against the South. But I can blow that up quickly. I always say this: slavery is irrelevant to that war, and people just their eyes get huge. You know, what are you talking about?
Can I just interject something, and then I'll let you continue?
Of course.
I've heard a theory that if the Civil War never happened, slavery would have eventually died out anyway because it was just happening all over the world, and that public pressure would have kind of pushed people to give up on slavery anyway.
If the war against the South would have never happened, slavery would have died out eventually. Yeah, I agree with that. Wouldn't have happened. Well, you got to remember, there were a lot of liberals in the South who wanted to get rid of slavery, but in a measured, intelligent manner. But you had the problem with these abolitionists. They're a very dangerous set of people. So the abolitionists were saying, we don't care if we got to destroy the whole United States Constitution.
Did they all say that? All the abolitionists?
They generally said that.
I mean, because you would think abolition would be a pretty good thing to believe in, at least these days.
No, they were very radical and very violent. And William Lloyd Garrison, the founder of the abolitionists, one of the first things he did was burn a copy of the Constitution in, I think it was Boston. Why are you burning the Constitution of the United States? He said, because the Constitution protects slavery. He was right. When they signed the Constitution in 1870,
1787?
I said it backwards, 1787, the South demanded that there be a guarantee that slavery would be protected. So the North said, oh, okay. It wasn't really a big issue then so much. So they put it in there. It's in
There was still slavery in the North at the time.
A little bit.
Some states.
A little bit. It was dying out. Wasn't ever really big up north because of the climate landscape.
The industrialization of everything.
Taken over, yeah. So they put it in the Constitution. People can look it up if they don't believe me. I'll go get it if you insist. The Constitution was clear. It said that anybody who, if anybody escapes, now they tried to use euphemisms, but what they basically said was it's part of the Constitution. It's not an amendment. It said if people escape, they have to be returned to the owner if the owner makes an application that they be returned.
That's in the Constitution?
It's in the Constitution.
I know that was later passed as the Fugitive Slave Law in the 18...
That was a law that empowered. That was an enabling act to support the constitutional requirement. There were other Fugitive Slave Acts. The one in the 1850s was stricter, but it was part of the Constitution. If somebody escaped to a free state, they had to be returned upon application of the owner. So when they would escape, the owner would say, I want so and so return. They had to return them. But they weren't enforcing it so well. So the Fugitive Slave Act was a much stricter.
And at that time, the northern states who didn't want to do that actually used nullification, saying that the northern whatever state you're in Constitution supersedes the U.S. Constitution because they didn't want to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act. Is that accurate?
Yes. Hold on. Let me read these comments. That's right.
Yeah. Well, the Ivory Coast, that was Liberia, right?
Well, it was near Liberia.
Mhm.
Well, it wasn't the British that colonized the Ivory Coast. You're thinking of Ghana, perhaps. Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast was a French colony until 1960. Okay, but yeah, that Guinea Coast area. Okay, now, so yeah, the British wiped out slavery in Africa to a large extent. Now, well, you see, a lot of people in the North said, well, we're not going to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act because we don't like it. And like you said, we'll just nullify it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Southerners said, wait a minute. It doesn't really matter if you like it or if you don't like it. The problem is the Constitution was a contract, a treaty, if you want to call it, a treaty between independent states. When two sides sign a contract and one side announces that they're no longer going to honor the terms of the contract, then what happens to the contract? It's void. You've breached the contract. You're in breach. So that's what the Confederate argument was. You're in breach of contract. So you can't sit there and tell us you can't leave the United States like South Carolina when you're not going to follow the contract. So that's what South Carolina said. South Carolina said, hold on. When we joined the United States, which obviously was a fiasco, a disastrous decision, tricked us into joining. Okay, we joined in 1870. I keep saying that, 1788. But South Carolina had written, when they joined, they wrote into their law, we reserve the right to leave anytime we want. And a lot of other states did that too. Now, no one took issue with that in 1788. They said, well, how come nobody had a problem with putting that reservation in there back then? Oh, because you wanted us to join. So South Carolina simply said this, and they have the perfect legal argument. Perfect legal argument. You can't get around this. You can't get around the Constitution protecting slavery. It's in there, whether you like slavery or not. And of course, we don't like it, but that's the fact of the matter. We're not talking about what you like. We're talking about the Constitution right now. A lot of people can't get around that because we don't live.
Before the Constitution, did the Articles of Confederation protect slavery too?
I can't remember, but I don't think it even mentioned it. It was like it wasn't even an issue. You know what I'm saying? Like, wasn't.
So that's interesting. I mean, if that would have kept hold, how things would have played out.
Yeah, but it was so. All South Carolina said in 1860 was this. South Carolina said, look, the law we passed saying that we're going to join the United States, we're simply repealing that law. So the law that let us join the United States has been repealed. So therefore, we're no longer part of the United States. I mean, that's a pretty simple concept to realize, to conceive of.
And supposedly you're still that's still part of the Constitution that you can do that.
Oh no, the Supreme Court said no, you can't because of these are all Northern Supreme Court justices. You can't do that because of blah blah some reason that.
So even if some state just decided that they want to leave, just one state at a time, the Supreme Court said that they can't.
That's right.
What case was that?
Some case after the war, but there's some twisted logic, you know, like even Texas, when they joined, it said they could leave anytime they want. And in fact, it even said Texas could divide itself into 5 states if they chose to do it, not if the United States approved it. In other words, Texas could just vote to divide themselves.
Yeah, because every single one of these states it's a state. So a state is not a country. A state is. So it's supposed to be 50 states that are just combined together, kind of similar to the European Union of current times.
That was the concept, but that wasn't the intention of many of the Northerners. Their intention was it's an empire and you're a colony. Friar Tuck says, my mind has been blown. I hope it's been blown in a good way.
It wasn't an empire at first, though.
No.
And some people say it goes to after the Civil Wars when it became an empire, and then by 1898, when they had the Spanish-American War, that's really when it became an empire.
There's no doubt then. The United States was obviously an empire by 1898 when they're just attacking other countries to take their land. And then it just goes on and on after that, attacking Germany twice and everything.
But they did attack the Indian tribes who were supposedly sovereign nations themselves in some sort of sense before all of that. So, there's that whole issue as well.
Right. So the argument the South had was so solid, it's like can't even be contended against, Yeah, the Texas border did extend to Wyoming, but Texas made an agreement that they would give up their land in exchange for some money. Now, I don't understand this comment.
If your ancestors were slaves.
Now, let me read this comment. You appear too white. Although the 1% rule may apply.
What's the 1% rule?
What would your position be if your ancestors were slaves? Still a social problem.
It is a social problem. It
Robert,
definitely is.
Robert, I want you to rewrite that comment where I can understand what you're asking.
But I mean, I think even just the legacy of slavery is still going to contribute to a social problem. There's no getting around that. Socially, it's a problem.
Well, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that.
Oh, it creates civil unrest at times. If you look at the 1960s, just the legacy of it all.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that was so much the legacy, or that was just more of a situation of like revolutionary activity in the country. But anyway, any more questions about the war against the South, including you? You can ask, because I wanted to go on to the Sacred War.
Oh, you want to move? I'd rather do that too. I like that one.
Okay, world.
But you're gonna skip over 80 years?
Yeah, we're gonna skip over.
I like World War I also.
Okay, world. We made it very clear. That book is right. The South was right. Oh, you appear to be white.
You appear to be white?
I am. I am.
Yeah, I am too.
Oh, you're talking about it's a 3% rule. Oh, 1/32. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying too, Friar Tuck. And then it's not even just the 60s. It's still going on now. There's plenty of social issues.
I wouldn't call that a legacy of slavery. I would call that a revolutionary activity in America. That had more to do with communism and revolutionary activity. They were
and a lot of times it gets political, and politicians take advantage of it all. And by I don't know.
Yeah, Robert, I can't really answer these hypothetical questions except to say that I would believe this regardless. My heritage, I can't answer for my heritage because I have nothing to do with it. You understand? I cannot go back in a time machine and make me not what I am. Okay, just like
and the thing is, if you're white, a lot of white people in America, their ancestors never had slaves because they're from like immigrant stock of the late 1800s. A lot of people weren't. A lot of people's families didn't live here in the 1860s and before that. So just because you're white doesn't mean that your parents or your ancestors were of English descent and were here back in those early days.
Right,
so it wouldn't apply to your family.
Right. I know a woman who came from Italy. She had nothing to do with the United States till she was a kid.
Plenty of people came from Italy. I mean, a lot of people.
I know a lady now, though. She came from Italy when she was a kid.
Oh, yeah, right.
You're just asking me to switch viewpoints. I can entertain the viewpoint, but I can't switch it because I don't believe in it. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not going to go against the law. I'm not going to go against the Constitution because of emotional attachment to racial heritage or whatever. The law is the law. The Constitution is the Constitution. I'm sorry. And the whole point I was trying to make was South Carolina said, look, you're not going to follow the Constitution, so we're getting out. It's simple. We want to leave. And the whole point of that war was the United States said you can't leave. Now
the English people used to have Irish slaves over there, and they're not giving their ancestors any reparations of any sort that I hear of.
That's pretty good, Nate. Well, they weren't technically slaves, but they were in practice.
I think they probably were at one point. They were slaves.
Well, in a practical sense. Yeah, you're right, Triple J.
Yeah.
Well,
He said it right there.
no, my pastor never said that. No, you took that wrong. That was the guy that just died, Lowry. Reverend Lowry said white needs to make it right. He made the inaugural speech. I didn't say anything about my pastor. My pastor never made that statement. That's an incorrect thing. Reverend Lowry said white needs to make it right. That's got nothing to do with me or my church. Okay.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So the South Carolina said you're not going to follow the Constitution, so we're going to leave. And the U.S. was like a man saying to his girlfriend, "You're not leaving this relationship. We're not breaking up. I'll kill you." And the same people that say the South had no right to leave would definitely not say a woman can't leave without being killed. Yeah, that's okay, Grinder. You just misunderstood. Right. Lowry just passed away. That's right. But he's the one that made that comment. That's what he said. Okay, so when Ronnie Rio comes back, we're going to talk about the Great Holy War. But we're not going to be on much longer, I don't think. I want to go listen to the music. I want to go start watching those video reviews for the whiskey. But we're going to talk a little bit about the war. You got some thoughts about, you wanted to talk about the good war. We're on the 75th anniversary right now of the end of the good war. So you had some comments about that war?
Just the usual, what you usually talk about. There was no reason to join from an American perspective.
So the war against the South, so-called Civil War, the opinions or especially I expressed, are not acceptable in American society, even though it's strange that the correct interpretation is considered the inappropriate interpretation, even though it's the correct interpretation. And when it comes to the Great Holy War of 1939 to 19...
Well, the principle, I think, at play is that the victors write history. So the North won, so they wrote what you're supposed to believe about it.
Yes.
But that can go for any war.
Right. But in a free country, you can still say, no, well, you're wrong,
Well, you can do your own research because there's plenty of it out there. So there's that.
Right. World War II, that's a big controversial thing because my grandfather was in the war. My other grandfather didn't get drafted because he had a health problem.
I think everybody's grandfather was in the war. My grandfather was.
And yeah. And I don't trip out over World War II. Like, you know what I mean? It happened. All right. It happened. Fine. Only thing I'll make statements like that people will tell me, your grandfather served over there so you could be free. I said, no, he didn't serve for that. He thought he served for that. I said, he served for nothing. But
he might have been drafted. Right?
He volunteered because they went to him and said, you can either get drafted or volunteer.
My grandfather was in high school at the time. I think he was 17, and I guess he wasn't a good student at the Catholic school he was at. So the priest came over, I think it was, and said, "We're going to let you out of school, and you can go join the fight." So I don't think he never actually graduated high school, but then he went on to, have a career at the post office and stuff like that later on. Yeah. Back in those days, it didn't really matter.
No. It doesn't even matter today. I know somebody that dropped out of high school and he's a big wig at Shell Oil. He makes way more money than me. He's a high school dropout and he's an executive at Shell. And why is that? Because Shell knows he's smart and he can do the work. I know another guy who's a high school dropout and he's a big wig at ExxonMobil. He makes $200,000-300,000 a year. Why is that? He invents things for them.
Well, yeah, I think the Facebook guy was a high school dropout.
Yeah. Now,
Zuckerberg, we're not I think
out from high school, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great point. A very great point.
Yeah, if anybody thinks they live in a free country now, they're just living in an absolute flight of fancy.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
We're all slaves to the money. Okay. Well, that sounded kind of like socialist talk. But anyway, but you know what I'm saying?
We're slaves to a lot of things.
Right. Some people are slaves to alcohol, slaves to drugs, slaves to gambling, slaves to debt. But yeah, my grandfather, he served, you know. Now they got people posting on Facebook all the time, this Vietnam stuff, World War II stuff, and it's like they're trying to force you to say thank you for your service.
Oh well, if you
And I
don't
just
say that, you're in big trouble. If you don't
right,
say that,
why can't you be humble? You know, like my grandfather was humble. He did not go around the grocery store wearing a cap saying World War II veteran. You know, he didn't want
even
people.
if they do that, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, you did do something that's somebody else wouldn't really want to do.
But he didn't want people to know that.
Yeah, right.
All right. He never talked to he talked to me about it, but he didn't want anybody to know he was in World War II. And when he died, he wanted his funeral to be secret. But they still had an honor guard from the army, but it was just 2 people. But he just didn't, he told me, he said, the real heroes are over there, still there. They're not like me, you know.
I
So
have kind of a good story, a short story about somebody I was talking to just a couple of weeks ago over here at the pool in my complex. There's a guy about my age. He volunteered for the Coast Guard and he was in Iraq. And then he signed up to do like some private stuff where he got paid extra money and he was over there. And he was just hanging out and he mentioned it. And then there was some older guys who were like, well, thank you for your service. And he was like, for what? Don't thank me for anything. I volunteered to do it and I got paid for it. And then they were just like, well, thank you, for serving your country. And he was like, no, don't thank me for that. So I think you see more of it out of actual military members who they kind of feel weird when people tell them that thank you. It's more of a civilian thing that everybody seems conditioned to say thank you for your service. And the military guys, some of them don't even want to hear it.
my grandfather definitely didn't want to hear it. And but this is like a constant thing on thank you, Fire Talk. This is a constant thing on Facebook that people like to say they died over there so you could be free here. And I try to tell people, no, them fighting in World War II did not make me free. It didn't keep me free. I even made a video called War Does Not Make or Keep You Free.
I watched that.
That was a solo video. Did you agree with it?
Yeah, I do.
What was the title? War Neither Makes Nor Keeps You Free. That was the title of it.
Then you had one about alliances, that they're a problem.
Yeah, alliances are terrible. It's terrible to be in an alliance. So
a war alliance. If you're in a free trade alliance,
that's different.
Makes more sense.
It's different. But like I said, I just have certain principles. War is bad. And I always challenge people. I say, name any war the United States has ever been in, and I can tell you why it was a mistake, And some people get angry. But instead of getting angry, why don't you tell me why they
get angry because they went to school and they were told to pledge allegiance for the flag, and you learn that these things are correct. And so, like I said before, if your whole thing that you've known your whole life is kind of like shattered by somebody else's thoughts on it, then they don't want to hear those thoughts.
Yeah, but I mean, people should be more open-minded the way
they
I
should
think.
Be.
It's like, alliances are bad. War never helps. I'm not saying if you're attacked, you can't defend yourself. I'm saying, and you can look at every war the United States has been in, they didn't get attacked. That's all I'm saying. Alliances are sometimes.
And I think these views were a lot more acceptable before the 9/11 attacks happened, because after that, we went into a free fall spin of government control and accepting wars of ridiculousness. And if you don't accept it, you're some type of un-American communist or something.
Now, see, I disagree with this comment right here.
Yeah.
I would like to know, when are they necessary? When is an alliance necessary? Can you tell me that? People say it a lot, but they never can tell me why. You know,
Well, World War I is a great example of that not working out.
I can think back to 1776, and I can't think of a single time when an alliance was necessary. I can't think of a single time. I would like somebody.
Are you saying for American alliances, it was never necessary?
For anybody, but especially for America, since we live here. But I can't think of any time when an alliance was necessary. Any time.
Well, you can't think of a single time that a war was necessary, so you're not going to think of an alliance was necessary either.
I can't think of a single time a war was necessary. I mean, I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Well, give him time to type. Give him a chance.
I'm a patient person. Tell me what war was necessary, even though there ain't any.
The Spanish-American War. We had to.
And tell me
we had to team up with those Cuban rebels.
Yeah, sure. And tell me when an alliance was necessary. You can't, because it ain't.
Shepherd named That's cool.
It's good to know.
That's cool.
There's a perfect example of a terrible war that over 33,000 Americans died.
It's called the Forgotten War.
And it was a bunch of bull crap, a bunch of garbage, And there's some evidence that the U.S. baited North Korea into attacking. And there's evidence that the United States baited Iraq into attacking in 1990.
That they gave them the okay to attack Kuwait in a sense, knowing that once they did it, they would then invade yeah.
I don't know why these people fall for these Anglo-American traps. They set the trap and they always walk into it. I don't understand. Native Missouri. You're right, and I don't even support that war.
Yeah, I know. I watched your video on that too.
I made a video about the Revolutionary War, and
you basically say that you don't understand why they broke away from the English because they're in a partnership anyway.
Right, I don't understand that. Why would the United States want to break away from Great Britain? People say, well, because they'll say, no taxation without representation. I said, no, where did that come from?
And look at us now. Look at how we're being taxed.
I mean, you worrying about a 1 penny tax, and you paying over half your money is in taxes now. And you wanted to break away from the British, who had virtually no regulations and no taxes. For what?
But that wouldn't have continued anyway.
No, it wouldn't have continued. It would have just been as regulatory now as then. But so what? So now we have all these regulations with a striped flag. Well, hell, we could have had all the regulations with a different striped flag.
Mm-hmm.
What difference does it make?
I don't know. I think maybe they were thinking something different back in the 1770s. That they wanted to break away, but then as time went on, all the Anglophile presidents and whatnot kind of just caused America to side with whatever the British position was.
And that goes way back to almost the first day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know what you mean, Friar Tuck. I'm not understanding what you're saying. Roll the dice and wait, I guess. Wait on what? There's no one trying. The Tories got a raw deal and Canada is doing fine.
What does he mean by that? The Tories in Canada? I don't really follow Canadian politics.
I'm not sure what he means. When people get all excited about the revolution, oh, here's the cat. What do you have?
What do you have?
What do you have?
What is that?
I'll have a Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Oh, that's your hat. Okay.
My neighbor says, oh, I'd love to have a Pabst. I said, well, I don't have any Pabst in the fridge. I got a lot of beer, though. Oh, you do? And I told her what I had. Ugh. I said, well, you could have, you don't want to try it? I like light beer. I said, well, I don't have any light beer. She didn't want any. I said,
she likes Pabst, though, PBR.
Well, that's kind of light,
Yeah.
My neighbor across the street likes that ice house. That she likes some strong, the lady down the street wants some water, like the
Do they have a PBR light?
Yes. I saw it the other day. It's a crapshoot. So I don't understand what you mean. I mean,
Fire Tuck?
Yeah, I mean, alliances have never helped the United States. There's not any instance. Now you might say, well, they helped us break away from Great Britain. Yeah, but my argument is they shouldn't have been trying to break away from Great Britain.
Well, the alliance with Great Britain brought us into both world wars.
Right. That was an informal alliance. It wasn't even a formal alliance. They were just in cahoots. And so you know, people say we have to protect Lithuania, and I tell them, you ever looked at Lithuania on a map? They don't know where it is. They just hear stuff on TV. They don't believe me, folks. Alliances, raw deal, bad. Get out of them. Bad. Bad. Starting wars with other countries, bad. That's just my opinion. I mean, other people might. I'm talking about World War II. I don't see a lot of people jumping on here getting upset. Maybe people are starting to wake up and realize that it was a bum rap. You know.
I don't know about that. That's probably the one war that you can't really say we shouldn't have joined.
Oh, well, I made a comment about the United States dropping firebombs on Tokyo.
Dropping firebombs. What about dropping atomic bombs?
Oh, yeah, but I didn't get to that yet. But they started last month. It was like in February, I think. Actually, February of 1945. They started bombing Tokyo with incendiary bombs, like gasoline bombs, for the sole purpose of setting the entire city on fire, which worked. They burned the whole city up, killed like 100,000 people.
They were doing the same thing in Germany.
Right. So this guy, who's like the king of the liberals in Louisiana, jumps on there talking about, you're warping what happened. You have certain opinions and you're warping what happened. I said, I'm not warping anything. That's exactly what happened. What he was trying to say, it was necessary. I said, I'm glad I'm not you, a person who has to justify murdering 100,000 people with gasoline bombs. No response. And I wanted to tell this guy, you don't want to go there. And he likes to trumpet, I was in the Vietnam War. And I wanted to say, I saw Ozzy Osbourne twice. So
the whole thing with this, I want to preface this conversation with that. By saying that you're anti-war or you're anti-silly wars that the U.S. government gets this country involved in, is not saying that you're anti-military or anti-veterans per se.
no.
And that's where the two things get mixed up, and that's why people get mad. They say, "Oh, if your grandfather was there, you should thank him for his service and all this stuff." Listen. The soldiers and Marines and all these people who are in wars go through a lot of horrible experiences that if you're an anti-war person, you're saying they shouldn't have to go through this. And,
Right,
and I think that's really the best way to support the troops is by not letting or not condoning the experiences that they're forced to go through.
Right. I'm the soldier's best friend.
Right. I mean, and that's what people can't really see that.
You follow my policies.
They take it the other way.
Yeah, and it's not my policies because a lot of people believe what we believe. It's not it's a growing group, I think. We want to keep the soldiers from going to the dang war in the first place, from getting the psychological damage, from getting the legs blown off,
right,
getting their arms blown off. Don't tell me I don't support the troops. Hell, I don't want them to go get killed in the war. You think you support the troops, but you want them out there dying. And I got the king of the liberals in Louisiana telling me I'm wrong for criticizing bombing 100,000 people with gasoline bombs and killing them.
And you know who's the worst at supporting the troops is the American government is the worst people at supporting the troops. The VA hospitals are garbage. And just because they go to a baseball game or a football game and you give them the spotlight and say thank you for your service, that isn't enough. It isn't enough.
Of course, they're the worst supporting the troops. So they're the ones that got the troops hurt in the first place with their harebrained, ridiculous, idiotic, moronic, stupid, bad, evil policies. Okay. Why would I apologize for supporting an ideology that would have kept 58,000 Americans from getting killed in Vietnam, that would have kept 33,000 Americans from getting killed in Korea, kept 300,000 Americans from getting killed in World War II, 88,000 Americans from getting killed in World War I, 150 Americans getting killed in the Spanish War. I don't know. It wasn't that many. It was like 2,000 died of sicknesses. 600,000 Americans dying in the war against the South for nothing. Think about that. Over 300,000 northern people got killed for nothing. They got monuments all over the north. In every northern town, a monument to Northern soldiers who died for nothing. They ought to put that. These poor men died for nothing. That wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth of it, but it sounds, you know, people want to believe that their son died for a reason.
Right, because it's hurtful and it's very
It is
hard.
hurtful. It's a damn shame.
Right.
The
Right.
Dixie Chicks. That's a good example. Yeah, you know what happened with them, right?
Their career was destroyed, and he's
Yeah,
saying,
2004, I think they did it, or 2003.
but you see, they made a mistake because they were not purified anti-war activists. They were anti-war activists because they didn't like Bush, because they're a bunch of Democratic liberals.
Oh, okay. But anyway, all the Democratic
Right,
liberals who were against that were right, at least in that one position.
right. But you see, but if it had been Obama bombing Libya, which he did.
You think they'd be okay with that one, the Dixie Chicks?
You ever heard the Dixie Chicks talk about Syria or Libya? I didn't.
No. Maybe they learned their lesson the first time. I don't know.
See, this is my problem. You got a lot of these qualified anti-war people. They're only anti-war when certain people are in office.
That's a good point. The anti-war movement against Iraq completely died out once Obama became president.
I tell people that all the time. Where were you? You're not anti-war. You lie. Yes, I am. I said, no, you're not. You love Obama. That's right, because you tried to help the people. I said, how is invading Libya and invading Syria helping the people? Well, they don't even know what I'm talking about because they apparently don't watch the news or keep up.
It was a very short-term thing that barely got covered. But it was BS. The Libya thing was garbage.
Craig's being silly. He knows we're talking about military alliances.
Did Trump serve? He didn't.
No, but I don't know what that's got to do with anything.
He didn't serve.
Look, I would support the Dixie Chicks if they were truly anti-war and not just trying to go against Bush.
I think you can support them in limited circumstances, though. They were doing the right thing with that at the time.
At the time. But want to be consistent. I know many people
that's how you have to try to bring alliances together, by looking at things that we agree on.
Right. We bring them in. We say, look, you can't just pick on Bush because he's starting a war of aggression. You got to pick on your lovely Democrats.
You can pick on Bush. You can pick on Obama. You can pick on Trump. You can pick on Clinton. You can pick on every president going back at least to World War II.
Right. And I say that, but people are so partisan. And then people will tell me, you Republicans are all the same. I say, I'm not even a Republican. What are you talking about?
I know Noam Chomsky, I don't know if you heard of this. He once said every president going back to at least World War II, if they were tried under the Nuremberg laws for war crimes, they would all be guilty. Have you heard that quote? I think that's a great quote.
I haven't heard the quote, but I mean, it sounds plausible. We can just name every president. Maybe not Jimmy Carter.
No, it included Jimmy Carter too.
Yeah, I would have a hard time
because Jimmy Carter was the first one. What did he do with when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan? He was the first one to start supplying the Mujahideen before Reagan came in.
Oh, okay, that's right. I forgot about that. And there's a lot more to that story than meets the eye. So before people get too worked up, the United States had been involved in Afghanistan since about 1973, and really longer than that. So they think it happened in a vacuum, that Russia invaded in a vacuum. Wrong. Okay. We saw,
we died. That's Hillary Clinton on Libya. Yep.
That's right. She's a demented warmonger.
But Trump is following the same thing. I think it would be worse if Hillary Clinton got in, but I mean, Trump's banging the war drums on Iran constantly.
Right.
And other things too, he's not that great at. So he's definitely not an anti-war president.
Nate, they do shun me. Now, Trump, I'm not a Trump supporter anymore after he had that Iranian general murdered.
Oh, was that what put it over the top for you?
Yeah, I was already against him because they bombed Syria, although I think that was a showcase bomb and it wasn't a real attack.
Yeah, but that was still done.
That was just like a little pretend attack to try to placate the neocons. I'm still not quite sure about Trump because he still might be trying to placate the neocons, but he's kind of dumb, so they're easily they're able to manipulate him, just like the fear mongers with the virus are able to manipulate him. See, so
Yeah. Trump he ran as an anti-war candidate. Then as soon as he gets into office, everybody he appoints is a neocon, and then
right,
he fired a few of them. But why'd you hire them in the first place?
right. Either to keep an eye on them or you're just dumb. It makes you wonder.
It does, yeah.
But then,
And he is also being taken advantage of with this coronavirus stuff too. I think he's not in
oh yeah,
control.
yeah, they're manipulating him so badly. Anyway, I think we pretty strongly set our anti-war ideology out here.
Yeah, we didn't get much into World War II, but I think we got the point across, I guess.
Yeah, and then anytime you'd want to, one day we could do another one, and then I'll let you have the floor, and you can kind of run it, and I'll respond to you.
Oh, I don't know about that. I'll try. I'll give it a shot.
Why not?
What I was thinking is maybe we can do like one war at a time. Start with the Spanish American War, and just kind of go speak about how it was really unnecessary, and take like one episode for each one. Give it
However you want to do it. However you want to do it, I would totally go along with it.
That sounds cool. All right, I'd be interested in that.
Call it Ronnie's Ruminations. Ronnie's Ruminations on War. And Ron Rio rum.
I've still never tried the Ron Rio.
You're lucky.
I just think it sounds like a cool name.
You ought to feel blessed. Two Ronnies against war. Whatever. All right.
Yeah, you can do that.
And then if people are pro-war, now see, some people told me today that we needed alliances, but I'm still waiting on why.
I think he said just wait and see what happens. Was that?
Yeah.
What he said?
So that gives us an opportunity to talk further. You see, so in future episodes, the people that are saying we need alliances, we can say why and tell us why. You know, don't be. I mean, yeah, I'm loud and very forceful or whatever. Don't be intimidated by that. You know, come on, let's talk about it. You know.
Yeah, I think especially you can have a great conversation and not be disrespectful to anybody. And that's what's really important. Because if people have different points of view, you can try to persuade them to think what you think and vice versa without being disrespectful.
You don't have to be disrespectful. And in fact, when you start calling names and getting disrespectful, it shows that your argument is weak.
Right.
You know? And I don't think it's necessary. It isn't necessary. It's foolish. And you see a lot of debates where people are just screaming and hollering and cursing each other. And I can't even watch that stuff.
Yeah, and they do it right on like cable news. They're not cursing obviously on the TV, but that's how the style is of how these things go. Not necessarily talking about anti-war stuff because they would never bring that up on cable news, but you know, just the usual Democrat versus Republican nonsense. And it's like it's a spectacle to watch people yell at each other. It's really dumb.
I'd rather watch pro wrestling.
Me too.
And I wouldn't want to watch that. All right, thanks folks for watching this anti-war video. And it says Port Hudson. We talked about Port Hudson a little bit, but Port Hudson is certainly just a detail of history. It's not the nexus of history. You know, it's not the axis that drives the vehicle, but it's an interesting battle and whatnot. All right, thanks for watching.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, man.
You're welcome. Anytime that we're able to do it, of course.